Have you ever noticed how the most powerful person in the room is rarely the one doing all the talking, while everyone else competes for attention interrupting, oversharing, desperately trying to prove their intelligence? There's often one individual who simply watches, listens, reveals nothing while absorbing everything, and somehow, inexplicably, they're the one everyone seeks to impress, the one whose rare words carry weight, the one who seems to hold an invisible advantage over those who can't stop filling the air with sound. This is no accident. What if I told you that beneath the surface of human interaction lies a hidden power dynamic one that most people never recognize, yet unconsciously respond to every day? A dynamic where what you don't say shapes reality more profoundly than what you do? In a world obsessed with expression, with finding your voice, with broadcasting every thought and feeling, few dare to speak the uncomfortable truth. Your silence is often your greatest source of power. Niccolo Machiavelli, that infamous Italian philosopher of power, understood this 5 centuries ago. While everyone remembers his more brutal advice on manipulation and control, they overlook his subtler, more sophisticated strategy one that requires no resources, no authority, no special talent. Just disciplined silence. Today, we're going to explore this forbidden territory, not to manipulate others, but to stop being manipulated ourselves, not to control, but to avoid being controlled. To understand why, in Machiavelli's words, nothing is more valuable than the fortress of one's own silence. Are you ready to discover the power you've been giving away with every unnecessary word? To understand the strategic power of silence, we must first understand Machiavelli himself, a man whose name has become synonymous with cunning and manipulation, yet whose deeper insights remain largely unexplored. Born in 1469 in Florence, Niccolo Machiavelli lived during one of history's most turbulent periods. The Italian Renaissance was not just an era of artistic and intellectual flowering. It was a cutthroat political landscape where power shifted constantly, where alliances formed and dissolved overnight, where one wrong move could mean exile or death. It was in this environment that Machiavelli developed his understanding of power not as an abstract philosophical concept, but as a practical reality with life or death consequences. His most famous work, The Prince, is often reduced to the simple and simplistic idea that the ends justify the means. But Machiavelli's actual philosophy is far more nuanced and far more applicable to our everyday lives than this caricature suggests. At the heart of Machiavelli's thinking is a radical honesty about human nature. Unlike philosophers who describe how people should behave ideally, Machiavelli focused on how they actually behave in reality. He observed that humans are fundamentally self-interested, inconsistent, and quick to judge others while making excuses for themselves. Men are so simple of mind and so much dominated by their immediate needs that a deceitful man will always find plenty who are ready to be deceived, he wrote. But here's where Machiavelli's insight becomes truly profound. In a world where everyone is performing, positioning, and protecting their interests, information becomes the ultimate currency of power. And the primary method of controlling information? Strategic silence. Throughout The Prince and his lesser-known but equally important work Discourses on Livy, Machiavelli returns repeatedly to the theme of information asymmetry, the advantage gained by knowing more about others than they know about you. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are, he observed. This gap between appearance and reality creates the space where power operates most effectively. And how do you maintain this gap? By careful control of what you reveal through speech. Machiavelli understood that humans have an almost irresistible urge to express themselves, to share their thoughts, display their knowledge, reveal their feelings. This impulse, while natural, creates constant vulnerability. Every time you speak, you give others information they can use to understand, predict, and potentially control you. The vulgar crowd always is taken by appearances, and the world consists chiefly of the vulgar, Machiavelli noted. By this, he meant that most people operate on the surface level of communication, taking words at face value, failing to recognize the strategic dimension of speech and silence. This creates an opportunity for those who understand that communication is not just about expression, but about power. By speaking less while encouraging others to speak more, you create an information imbalance that almost always works in your favor. Consider Machiavelli's advice to rulers. A prince ought to be a great asker and a patient hearer of truth about those things of which he has inquired. The powerful don't prematurely reveal their own positions. They first extract information from others, understanding that knowledge precedes effective action. But Machiavelli's strategy goes beyond simply gathering information. He recognized that silence serves multiple functions in the dynamics of power. First, silence creates mystery, and mystery creates perceived value. Men in general judge more by the eyes than by the hands, Machiavelli observed. When you reveal little about yourself, others fill the gaps with their own projections, often attributing more depth, wisdom, or capability than might actually exist. Second, silence prevents the errors that come from impulsive speech. It is a double pleasure to deceive the deceiver, Machiavelli wrote, noting how easily people trap themselves with their own words. By speaking less, you commit fewer errors and create fewer vulnerabilities for others to exploit. Third, silence forces others to reveal themselves first. In any negotiation or relationship, whoever speaks first typically gives away their position, creating a disadvantage. Machiavelli understood that patience in communication often leads to advantage. The wise man does at once what the fool does finally. Fourth, silence builds tension that increases the impact of your words when you do choose to speak. Men are so simple and so ready to obey present necessities that one who deceives will always find those who allow themselves to be deceived, Machiavelli observed. When your words are rare, they carry disproportionate weight. Finally, silence allows you to observe not just what others say, but how they handle the discomfort of silence itself. Those who nervously fill conversational gaps often reveal insecurities and intentions they would otherwise keep hidden. Machiavelli's strategic approach to silence isn't about never speaking. It's about speaking with purpose rather than from impulse. It's about understanding that every word carries not just meaning, but strategic consequence. That in the economy of information, those who conserve their words often accumulate the most power. This isn't manipulation in the negative sense. It's recognition of a fundamental reality about human interaction that most people never consciously acknowledge. As Machiavelli put it, men are so simple of mind and so much dominated by their immediate needs that a deceitful man will always find plenty who are ready to be deceived. The true power of Machiavellian silence isn't in deceiving others, but in refusing to deceive yourself about the strategic nature of human communication. It's about recognizing that in a world where everyone competes for attention and validation through constant expression, the disciplined practice of strategic silence creates an almost unfair advantage. Now, let's examine how this philosophical insight applies to our modern world, how the strategic use of silence creates power dynamics in everyday situations most people never consciously recognize. Machiavelli's insights about strategic silence aren't abstract philosophical notions. They're practical tools that operate in nearly every domain of modern life. Let's examine how the power of disciplined silence manifests in various contexts. Professional settings. The silent authority. Have you ever noticed how the most respected person in a meeting is rarely the one dominating the conversation? While others interrupt, over-explain, and anxiously fill every silence, the true authority often speaks last and least. Yet their words carry the most weight. This is Machiavellian silence in action. By speaking less, you accomplish several things simultaneously. You gather more information from others before revealing your own position. You avoid the errors that come from thinking out loud. You create an air of thoughtfulness that others interpret as wisdom. And most importantly, you force others to commit to positions without knowing where you stand. Consider how this plays out in salary negotiations. The first person to name a number almost always loses. When asked about salary expectations, the amateur immediately reveals their desired number, while the strategist remains silent, perhaps responding with, "I'd be interested to know what range you have budgeted for this position." This simple application of silence often results in thousands of dollars of additional compensation. Or consider performance reviews. When receiving criticism, the natural impulse is to immediately defend, explain, or justify. But those who understand the power of silence know that an immediate response often looks defensive and diminishes perceived authority. A thoughtful silence followed by a measured response conveys confidence and self-control qualities associated with leadership. When you ask for a raise and your boss says no, the amateur immediately starts negotiating down. The master remains silent, creating an uncomfortable void the other person feels compelled to fill, often with concessions. This isn't manipulation. It's recognition of the fundamental human discomfort with silence and how it affects power dynamics in professional settings. Relationships, the silent observer. Perhaps nowhere is Machiavelli's insight about silence more valuable than in personal relationships, where emotional reactivity often leads to regrettable words and damaged connections. Consider how arguments typically escalate. Person A says something hurtful. Person B immediately retaliates with their own hurtful statement, creating a cycle of escalating intensity where both parties say things they later regret. The Machiavellian approach interrupts this pattern through strategic silence, not as passive aggression, but as a tool for de-escalation and information gathering. When someone makes a provocative statement, your immediate response reveals your emotional triggers and vulnerabilities. By instead remaining silent for a moment, you gain valuable information about their intentions while maintaining control of your own emotional state. This same dynamic operates in dating and romantic relationships. Those who immediately reveal everything about themselves, their feelings, histories, insecurities, often create less attraction than those who maintain some degree of mystery. As Machiavelli might observe, humans value what they must work to discover more than what is freely offered. When someone asks why you're quiet and you explain yourself, you've surrendered your power. When you simply smile and remain comfortable in your silence, you maintain it. This isn't about being manipulative or creating artificial barriers. It's about understanding that premature emotional transparency often diminishes connection rather than deepening it. Social media, the strategic absence. In our digital age, Machiavelli would be fascinated by how social media has weaponized the human impulse for self-expression, creating environments where people compulsively reveal information that diminishes their power and well-being. Consider the standard social media user, constantly sharing opinions, emotional states, personal details, and reactions to current events. Each post creates a permanent record that can be used to map their psychology, predict their behavior, and potentially exploit their vulnerabilities. From a Machiavellian perspective, this represents an extraordinary surrender of strategic advantage. Those who understand the power of silence approach digital communication differently. They share selectively rather than compulsively. They resist the urge to immediately react to provocative content. They recognize that in a world of algorithmic analysis, every click, comment, and post creates data that others can use to influence their behavior. When you immediately respond to a provocative post, you're not just giving away information about your triggers, you're participating in a system designed to monetize your emotional reactivity. The strategic approach isn't complete digital abstinence, but conscious participation, understanding that in the attention economy, your engagement is the product being sold, and your emotional reactions are the resource being extracted. Negotiations, the silent leverage. In any negotiation, whether for a car, a house, a business deal, or simply deciding where to have dinner, Machiavelli's strategy of silence creates extraordinary advantage. Amateur negotiators fill silence with concessions. They reveal their bottom line too early, over-explain their positions, and nervously offer compromises before they're necessary. They treat negotiation as a rational exchange of information rather than a strategic interaction where information asymmetry determines outcomes. Those who understand the power of silence recognize that discomfort with silence itself is a vulnerability to be exploited. By remaining comfortable in silence after making an offer, they force the other party to break the tension, often with a concession. By asking questions rather than making statements, they gather information while revealing little about their own position. When the car salesman asks, "What monthly payment are you looking for?" and you answer directly, you've already lost. When you respond with silence followed by, "I'm focused on the total price, not the monthly payment," you've maintained your position. This approach isn't about deception. It's about recognizing that in most negotiations, people unconsciously reveal information that weakens their position simply because they cannot tolerate silence. Personal development, the silent growth. Perhaps most profoundly, Machiavelli's strategy of silence applies to our relationship with ourselves, particularly in a culture obsessed with external validation and expression. Consider how most people approach their goals and ambitions. They immediately announce them to others, seeking validation and accountability. From a Machiavellian perspective, this represents a strategic error. By prematurely sharing your intentions, you often receive the psychological reward of recognition before you've actually accomplished anything, reducing your motivation to do the real work. Those who understand the power of silence take a different approach. They develop their skills, pursue their ambitions, and formulate their plans in relative secrecy, revealing their achievements only when they're complete, rather than seeking validation for mere intentions. When you announce your diet to everyone, you receive social reward before losing a single pound. When you silently transform your body and let results speak for themselves, the impact is far greater. This isn't about being secretive for its own sake. It's about understanding that premature transparency often dissipates the very energy needed for meaningful achievement. In all these domains, professional settings, relationships, social media, negotiations, personal development, the pattern is the same. Those who speak impulsively surrender power, while those who deploy silence strategically accumulate it. This isn't about never speaking. It's about speaking with purpose rather than from compulsion. It's about recognizing that in the economy of human interaction, words are currency, and spending them indiscriminately leads to poverty of influence. If Machiavelli's insights about strategic silence are correct, if power truly flows to those who control information through disciplined communication, then mastering this approach requires a fundamental shift in how we engage with others and ourselves. This isn't about becoming manipulative or deceptive. It's about recognizing a reality that already exists, but operates largely beneath conscious awareness. Every word you speak carries strategic consequences, whether you intend it or not. So how do we apply Machiavelli's strategy in a way that's both effective and ethical? First, practice what we might call intentional silence, the deliberate pause before responding to any significant statement or question. This isn't about being unnaturally silent, but about breaking the automatic cycle of immediate reaction. Before you speak, ask yourself, what purpose does this communication serve? What information am I revealing? What advantage might I surrender? This simple practice, waiting even 5 seconds before responding in important conversations, often dramatically changes outcomes by giving you time to consider strategic implications rather than speaking from impulse. Second, cultivate comfort with silence itself. Most people feel an almost irresistible urge to fill conversational gaps, revealing information simply to ease their own discomfort. By practicing comfort with silence in conversations, negotiations, and conflicts, you develop an advantage over those who cannot tolerate the tension of unsaid words. Try this exercise. In your next important conversation, deliberately allow a silence to extend longer than feels comfortable. Notice your internal urge to speak simply to relieve tension. Resist it. Observe how the other person responds to this silence. You'll often find they reveal far more than they intended simply because they cannot bear the empty space. Third, become a strategic listener rather than a compulsive speaker. Machiavelli understood that information is power, and the primary way to gather information is through skilled questioning followed by attentive silence. Ask open-ended questions that invite others to reveal their positions, then resist the urge to immediately share your own thoughts. This isn't manipulative. It's the foundation of genuine understanding. By truly listening before responding, you not only gain strategic advantage, but often reach better outcomes for all involved. Fourth, recognize the power of selective revelation. Strategic silence doesn't mean never revealing anything about yourself. It means carefully choosing what, when, and how you reveal. By thoughtfully selecting which aspects of your thoughts, feelings, and intentions to share, you maintain both authenticity and advantage. Finally, apply the principle of delayed response to all forms of communication. In an age of instant messaging and constant connectivity, the expectation of immediate response creates constant vulnerability. By deliberately breaking this expectation, responding to messages and requests on your timeline rather than according to others' demands, you reclaim power in your interactions. The uncomfortable truth about human interaction is that it always involves power dynamics, whether we acknowledge them or not. By pretending these dynamics don't exist, we don't eliminate them. We merely surrender our position within them. Machiavelli's strategy of silence offers an ethical path to power, not through manipulation or deception, but through disciplined communication that recognizes the strategic reality of human interaction. Wake up to the power dynamics operating in your daily conversations. Notice how freely you give away information that others use to understand, predict, and influence you. Recognize how often you speak from compulsion rather than intention, revealing vulnerabilities without gaining comparable insight in return. Break the cycle of compulsive expression. Create space between stimulus and response. Recognize that in a world where everyone competes for attention through constant communication, disciplined silence creates both wisdom and advantage. Remember Machiavelli's insight. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. By controlling the gap between appearance and reality through strategic silence, you reclaim power that most unconsciously surrender. Your silence is indeed your superpower, not as a tool for manipulation, but as a practice of conscious communication in a world where most speak without awareness of the power they give away with every unnecessary word.